Before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts and conversation, I invite you to take a breath of gratitude for the day and gratitude for the community and for our time together here. And if you have a chalice in physicality or in spirit, feel free to light it or find it. I'm lighting one here, a little at-home COVID chalice here in my office. I have these words from Rod Richards, who was a UU minister and had some connections with my previous congregation. He writes, "We who gather here in this tender and anxious and confusing time, we have been awash in a sea of information and misinformation and disinformation, and this information that we seek is simply so that we may make wise decisions of how we respond and learn, how we hold one another when we can't hold one another, and decide how we can be when we can't be together. What is this we face? How best do we respond? Why is this happening? And the why over and over of those who suffer most. And what can we do for those among us who are most at risk, most vulnerable all the time and now again? How do we respond? How do we hold one another when we can't hold one another? How do we stay together and stick together and worship together when we can't be together? Yet we are here, and we are here together." So thank you, Rod. So light our chalice as we continue to discern our way through these times. I extend my gratitude to Joe Lobel and Anita DeAngelis as our core, as our COVID extraordinaires, swimming in all the details of not only data and metrics and statistics and vaccine finders and congregational guidelines, and so many emails and questions from their minister saying, "What about this? How do we do this? I'm getting questions about this." And fielding them with expertise and grace, as well as Ann Hutton, our president, who is on this team with us in her role as board president, helping guide us with grace and wisdom too. Just a note logistically for our time together. So we're recording so that we'll have this posted, and you can feel free to share as well, as this will be the basis for our guidelines and the conversation for it for the next several weeks, at least through early July, until we be the next time we'd meet, if anything were to change between now and then. So with that, I'm going to open it up over first to Anita, and then to Joe, and we'll do some general framing for our time together about what we're holding, knowing that so many of you are holding questions in your personal life and in institutional lives and communal lives, including here at church. And then get into the guidelines, some of which were shared in the e-news, if you saw that as well in the last couple hours. And then have a good amount of time for conversation and questions as well. So I'll start with Anita.
Okay, so this is the theme for the month is story. So I shared the story I'm going to tell you right now with the team the other day, and they said, well, let's tell a story. It started off this way. So, and I think it's for me, it's the idea that this is not a linear change, that we're kind of going forward and then we move back, we go forward, we move back. And we're doing this what we're doing and changing the way we behave is sometimes based on the science, and sometimes it's just kind of based on gut feeling. And I think that our team really wants to have everyone feel comfortable. So there's a lot of things that I know from my knowledge and my reading and where I work that I can tell myself intellectually, but sometimes I don't always feel it in my heart. So the story I was going to say is that last Saturday night didn't know what we're having for dinner. Decided about 8 o'clock to go out to dinner. It was a lovely evening like tonight. And we headed out to a local restaurant. I will leave it unnamed, with a lovely patio. And we parked across the street and we put on our little surgical masks, just like we always do when we have eaten out a few times during the pandemic. And as many of you know, I've been working throughout this whole time. So it's not as if I haven't gone out and I've not been circulating among vaccinated and unvaccinated people, but I feel like I've been taking precautions when I've done that. I've also done some traveling. Again, I feel like I've been very careful with that, but I haven't been hiding in my home. So we approach the area where we're gonna ask for a table, and they say, oh, go inside to speak to the hostess to get the outdoor table. So we walk inside, and immediately I was almost overwhelmed by the fact that I didn't see a single other person inside, staff or patrons, wearing a mask. And it just took us aback. So we said, well, can we have an outdoor table? So they took us with the menus, they walked us out, and it just felt as if, as we're walking out to this outdoor patio, again, not a single staff person or patron was wearing any kind of mask. We walked past pretty close to people, and Randy kind of under his breath said, do you feel a little conspicuous here? And it was as if it was sort of the self-consciousness that I felt when I first started wearing a mask. That was it in late March, early April, when I remember being at Walgreens when a few of us were kind of trying this thing out, and now it's just comfortable. So it was interesting to me. We sat down, and I couldn't help wonder how many people here, are unsafe. How many people are safe? Is this a safe practice? And even though for myself, I can tell myself that I'm vaccinated, and I have, you read the studies, you listen to the science, I really don't have a lot to worry about for my personal safety, but it just felt like it was moving too fast. So that was my gut reaction on that evening. We had a lovely dinner, lovely conversation with the waitress, but I was surprised at how uncomfortable I felt. So that's the story. So that's why what we're going to share tonight is about really caring for each other. Caring for each other's not only following the science, which I hope we are doing, but we also are caring for each other spiritually and emotionally, knowing we've gone through so much.
Thank you. One of the phrases that you shared there that reminded me of a colleague recently who said, it's going to take some time for us collectively, each in our own individual ways, to unclench our souls over these weeks and months of how we're re-entering in all our different unique contexts. And you lift that up beautifully of how we're caring for each other in a multiplicity of ways. Thank you. Joe.
I don't have any great stories like Anita, but I wanted to go over, we've been lucky, to been able to use the UUA as a resource, and they've been very helpful. And one thing I wanted to quote to you was some guidance that they gave to the congregations that we have to use as principles for planning. And we've been kind of using those as our basis. Number one, we should root our decisions in values of inclusion and consent. And so I think it's everyone, we gather in person, that everyone has the consent of that. We have to realize our rules are often, they look like they're more stringent than you see for schools or for businesses. And we really don't want to create an in-person situation that inadvertently excludes those at higher risk or creates situations that force those at higher risk to publicly identify themselves, for example, by having to wear a mask or not wear a mask if we're not doing that. And so I think our decision making is trying to look at the most vulnerable in our population and try to go from there out, realizing that a lot of people in our congregation are older and more vulnerable than the general population. A lot of children are not yet eligible to be vaccinated. We didn't want to put our staff, ministers at risk. And realizing that a fully open, normally operating congregation has too many opportunities really to spread a highly infectious disease. So we want to be inclusive, we want consent. The second principle is following the science. So we're trying to, as best possible, follow both the CDC guidelines as well as our state guidelines. Sometimes they've been at odds. The CDC has been, as you probably realize, have been changing their guidelines pretty regularly, including just a week and a half ago. And then they're not just, then the state has their own guidelines, which also are changing. And then there also are different rules, I'd say, for congregations. But then we also have to think about, well, yes, we're meeting, but then what's the subdivisions? Are we singing? What is the science related to singing? Are we singing as a group? Are we singing individually? Because singing also has different rules. So we're trying to follow the different scientific principles that will help us guide our decisions as well. And I think because of these changing guidelines from our scientific mentors, that leads to rule number 3. Rather than lurch forward and then have to reverse ourselves, we're trying to be slow and be flexible in our guideline changes. So I think moving forward, we are going to open up things. We're going to be meeting this Sunday in person, which is great, but we're trying to do it perhaps not as quickly as some people might like, but in a way that we feel is safe, and as Anita was pointing out, might help everyone feel more comfortable with the process by going more slowly. And again, if we're going to err on either side, we're trying to err on the side of caution and safety rather than try to be cavalier and non-risky. And finally, be realistic and humane, really, with our expectations for ourselves and others. Our goal is not perfection, of course. Our most important values are care and compassion. And we've all had a year of traumatic disruption, loss, and we're just trying to be realistic and have realistic expectations for the congregation as well. Luckily, we've had our staff has done incredibly well to keep our programs going, to have things online, keep us all safe. They've been able to remain safe. And we're trying to move forward from that, perhaps with to be able to do these in a multimedia way, to start having in-person services perhaps, but also maintain some of the multi-platform ways we've learned about, and just have honest conversations about our capabilities and expectations. So I think those are our principles. We have in the past talked about also, are there certain metrics we should be using? And we've had some interesting discussions about this. The UUA has passed down some other congregations' guidelines that have used, well, how many infections are we finding in the community per 100,000 people? Or how many people are in the hospital? Or how many deaths have you had in the community recently? Or how is the ICU capacity? And there are a lot of numbers out there, and I think they're good general numbers, but I've been probably the curmudgeon, I would say, of using these kind of numbers as our main deciding factors. I think the great news is we're seeing a lot of these numbers go down, both nationally and particularly in Olmsted County, which is great. So I think we're getting a gestalt or a feeling from all these numbers that things are getting better. And as Anita kind of said, we're also using our guts to kind of say, this sounds safe now, realizing that, great, Olmsted County has 75% of people over 16 with at least their first vaccine. Those are great numbers, but realize if we have a service at our church, we could have people walking in there who are not from Olmsted County. And then how do we know where they're coming? Maybe they're coming to the clinic, but are UUs and want to come to our service. Well, are we going to ask them at the door, are you vaccinated? I mean, they're just things that are, even though we know the local numbers, they may not pertain. So I think we're trying to be realistic, be humane, and try to set guidance that's safe for everyone and move forward in a steady way that makes everyone feel comfortable. So I think that's my general gist, and I think I'll let you go on from there, Luke.
There we go. Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm gonna pull up, I think we'll go to the guidelines themselves. Let me grab this here. One thing before we do that, I appreciate you lifting up too, Joe, that sense of that wider sense of community. I think this has been a time as we're reflecting today at our staff meeting. Of course, staff likewise, like all of you are like, when can we when can we move forward? When can we open, like there's that deep grief. It's coming from a place of grief and loss and hope and anticipation and all those things of how to move forward and all wanting to be at a different place. But also as we were talking about it, we realized how much there are such different experiences in little bubbles of whatever context you're in. Maybe you're around it who are fully vaccinated and you're feeling a little more normal in life. There are others who are in the midst of the school system who left and right different classrooms are being quarantined because children are getting COVID still, because it's entirely unvaccinated populations, and that population is an important and core part of our church community as well. So how to hold that, even though their risk is less, how to hold that that wider sense of who is we and us when we talk about being vaccinated and being low risk, and not only children, but immunocompromised and other folks for unknown reasons that it's so important to attend to. So thinking about all those complex things, I'm so grateful to have a team of folks to think through this together. Because as I know from colleagues across the country, this isn't what anybody in ministry or any profession or life signed up for or wanted to have to lead through and figure out, but we do it together. So I'm gonna bring up the guidelines here and share my screen again. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that all right. Good. So just by way of introduction, and then maybe I'll turn it over to Anita and Joe to kind of share. Maybe Anita, you want to kind of talk through a little bit of the summer phase. But just at the very beginning there, what we're rooted in as we've been lifting up. So with care for each other's health, body, mind, and spirit, we'll move into new phases gradually while valuing inclusion, science, flexibility, and grace. And that last part, of course, are from the values that Joe was lifting up. And body, mind, and spirit being what I mention every week in our prayer about how we care for each other in a holistic way, following both science and gut and all of it as we move forward. So Anita, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sure, and I'll just tell you, if you remember back, I think it was back in March or April, we had these various phases that we were going to move through. And I think as we as a team looked at them the other day, we were kind of joking because we're kind of past 3. We were past 3, but we weren't quite at 4 yet. So we kind of decided that what you're looking at here, which I think we discussed and came up with together, is really like phase 3.5. So that's about where we are right now. So essentially, most of the Sunday services are going to stay online, and they're going to be recorded. So they'll be available, and we'll have some guest speakers. But we do have those outdoor services. I think it's in the bulletin that came out today, the email. There's 3 services, I believe, that are planned that are going to be outdoors if weather permitting. Hopefully we have bad weather, we can put them off a little bit. We do want small groups to continue to meet, and they can do that completely or partially online. They can also reserve outdoor space for, in-person gatherings if they'd like. The coffee hours moving from a more structured format to more of a drop-in on Sundays, and obviously if the weather permits, but the online option is going to continue to be there for people who don't want to come out or want to stay in their PJs or, that just prefer that, feel more comfortable with that. So we've got a group of the staff as well as some other people that have been participating throughout the year that are going to be hosting those. Let me just see what else we hear. So when the small groups, we're going to encourage them to meet outside, but we know sometimes that weather, maybe they meet and then it starts to rain and they don't want to end. So they will be allowed to come inside, and we're encouraging people that they should wear masks when they're in close proximity to others. But once they're, and this is inside, but then they can, in fact, let me go back up. So even when they're outside, we encourage them to wear masks, but then they, once they're distanced, they can take those off. And I think the idea is that if a group knows that everybody is vaccinated, they can make a kind of a group decision that it would be okay to unmask for all of them. But I think that it's just requiring sensitivity there. So the expectation is that people would bring a mask and then can sit far enough apart that everyone will feel comfortable. And then we're gonna, this has been my kind of issue, we just need to provide for those, the potty or the restroom. So the restroom will be made available, and we can do that. Erica can help us with that remotely by setting, if we know a group's gonna be meeting outside in the parking lot or in the memorial garden or someplace on site, that she can unlock the door so people can use the restrooms when they're meeting. We're gonna have some guidance posted, like maybe one household at a time using the restrooms, just to avoid lots of people inside. Let's see what else. And yeah, we want people to wear masks if they come inside. And then Chalice Camp, we're gonna try to keep that outdoors as much as possible, but they'll use the building as they need it. I think the kids are going to be more used to that because they've been in, many of them have been in school, not all of them, but many of them have been in school. And there are some camp guidelines that they're going to follow that are from the CDC.
If I could just comment on that, speaking data-wise, I mean, it's just outdoor activities are just so much safer. The data, you know, I think the CDC was quoted at less than 10% of infections, and they've actually been called out on that. It's probably less than 1%. It's probably less than 0.1% of infections have been traced to outdoor exposures. So really, that's one reason we're kind of trying to stress outdoor meetings if we can, just because we know they're so much safer. Can they be safe indoors? Sure, but it's just outdoors is so great, and the weather, might as well take advantage of it while we have it. So that's my comment on that.
And we tried to keep these not like so detailed, but as in the italics below, there, you know, there's additional guidance and practices that if a group reserves the space, they'll get information about what would be the expectation. So that can be shared with the group. And again, we think this is we think it's gonna change. So again, all of this is, we could be moving quicker, or we might need to pull back a little bit. We'll just kind of see what's happening in the community. And again, watching the trends with the numbers.
Thanks, Anita. Yeah, one of the phrases that we talk about among colleagues is also change fatigue. And since our June theological theme is Sabbath, I think it's good to take a little break from trying to update any guidelines for a few weeks, and to take a little break for Anita and Joe and others. And then we'll regather as a team. Erica Beecher will also be joining this team in an advisory way as well over the summer. So we'll gather in July and kind of look where things are locally, nationally, how vaccination paces are going and infection rates, whatever, all those metrics, and just kind of see how we're feeling as a church community. Hopefully we've not been rained out again, and we've been able to gather in person at least once this Sunday, and we have a little better sense of where we're headed, and then change any potential guidelines for the rest of the summer and into the fall as appropriate or needed. And you'll see there, this fall 2021, everything is tentative, but particularly this one, because we're still in the phase before. But the hope, of course, is to move toward Sunday services resuming in person as well as live streamed, with either capacity limits, safety practices, et cetera, appropriate for the current risk. Meetings and groups for adults may continue online or in person with appropriate safety guidance. Same with programming for children, depending on risk and vaccine availability. Some of us with children of those ages have been really paying attention to, when is Pfizer thinking about getting that approval? Is that September? Is that really going to happen? So we're watching that as well. And we'll continue that last thing just to re-emphasize, trying to provide the most accessible options we can, given circumstances. A lot of colleagues and folks in UU settings and other denominations as well have talked about this is going to shift how we've done church, and in some ways has propelled us forward in a lot of our technological connections. And perhaps in winter, it makes a lot of sense for some of our church, the board or various committees or groups will want to meet on Zoom in January in Minnesota at night and not travel to the church and be able to keep that option for folks. And many groups did this well before the pandemic as well. I know our AIM team here at church had been doing that for a long time. Their regular meetings were on Zoom. So trying to be creative and flexible and figure out how can we use what we've learned during this to be increasingly inclusive, as well as knowing that we want multi-platform, not just online. We want as much in person as is safe as well. So finding the balance there. And the full open at the bottom is the same language we had in that original draft that was quickly put together last March something, that when the risk of the virus is extremely low or non-existent, we'll resume, but we know it's going to be phased in as it is here. Joe or Anita, anything you want to add before we open up for questions?
I'll just say maybe one or two words about risk. You know, in the past, our country, or doctors, the whole society has accepted a certain level of risk, let's say with influenza. And even though there was a flu outbreak, you really didn't see church canceled, or maybe if it was really bad, we wouldn't shake hands with people or hold hands for the benediction or something like that. And we didn't really wear masks. And I think there may be a new normal setting in where maybe we'll wear masks if there's a flu epidemic going around. We will likely continue to meet. But, you know, I think we're so hyped in on the COVID risks now that maybe we're overdoing it a little bit, because, oh my gosh, someone might get this and get ill, and it's like, okay, but in the past we've accepted meeting with a certain low level of risk, and the studies show that newer risks are kind of felt more acutely to people and held in higher, fear than established or older risks. So we're probably going to be able to meet in person. We can never make it no risk, because nothing in life is no risk. But I think we'll probably get to what's considered an acceptable level, and we still want to keep that as inclusive as possible. So I just bring that up just because, you know, everyone's like, how can you do that? We might get sick. Well, I don't know that we can ever get to no risk, is what I would say.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. And either way, we probably need to have some better ventilation in a lot of the building for just general health and clean air. So I want to open it up either by chat or feel free to unmute yourself. Questions, comments, and let me know if you'd like me to share the screen again of either the guidelines or anything else too. I'm happy to do that, but I want to open up for your thoughts and reflections and feelings. How are you feeling about it all?
You know, I'm glad Joe brought up the flu. So I have a very simplistic attitude about this. Being vaccinated, they're telling us COVID is not likely to put us in the hospital. But you know, the flu has never put me in the hospital either. It doesn't mean I want to get it back again. So I'll just stay healthy. I think it's a better choice.
I looked at the data today. I think I'd heard a talk and I looked it up. I mean, typically the influenza kills like 30,000 people a year or 40,000 people in the country, which is kind of like the number of people who die from handguns, you know, or violent stuff like that. This past year, with everyone wearing masks and being distanced, it was 600 people. died from influenza. So it shows the benefit of masking and separation and vaccination, whatever, but
I think that we're probably going to just start wearing masks, I think, during the wintertime, even when we've reconvened. I think it's a good idea. And the sickest I've gotten in the last 5 years was caught at a church service, not at First UU, but I was sick for 6 weeks, and just the cough. And I've noticed that I've just been in other people talking about that just masking up during going out to the supermarket or whenever during the winter season might not be a bad idea going forward. So I'm used to masks. I have my masks. They don't seem to bother me. And in fact, in the wintertime, the warm air from the mask helps being outside. So I could just see us doing that, and as a normal matter of course in the wintertime going forward. I think it's been normalized enough.
One of my daughters would absolutely agree. She often will keep it on after school because she thinks it's cozy to wear her mask. So I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm glad she has.
and if you travel, we were lucky enough to get to Japan 2 years ago. It's common practice there for people on the subway or walking downtown to be wearing masks. And I think some of the people might have a respiratory thing, but others are just wearing it for safety's sake. So it's not even year round in a particularly crowded area like Tokyo.
I don't remember if you had specific guidance on, on that last document, but is there anything said about whether we'll be passing a plate, or, if that's going to be taboo, or thoughts are on drinking coffee together? Was that mentioned in your list?
I'll jump into that. So we did have some discussion the other day. When do you think we will be eating together or having coffee together? And then there's like, is it indoors or outdoors? And I think there was right now, I think we're very hesitant to open it up to inside, taking any masks off for any eating or whatever. I'll speak out. This is like we're at the meeting now. I probably would be comfortable if people brought their coffee, and at an outdoor thing, we're sipping their coffee outside. I personally wouldn't feel uncomfortable with that. I don't know what the rest of the team thinks, but doing that inside is a whole nother thing.
No, obviously we discussed it, and let's just say right now it's certainly on hold, and we'll reconsider as more information comes, much as we all love our coffee and treats. I think the first step is getting together and making sure that's safe, and then and like Anita said, outdoors, I would have no problem with that, really, generally. Indoors.
We were talking about having a memorial service kind of idea, and like, well, maybe the treats, those beautiful trays of food that Jean Hansen and team make, and maybe it's not just Jean, but that beautiful silver service pouring and all that all might be on a table right outside the door, and you stop and you get it and you go and talk outside and munch outside.
I think one of the things, that's a good question, Robin, and some of the early guidance from the different councils of churches last spring mentioned that as well, that not passing the plate, not having things go around, not sharing hymnals, but that was very early on when it was a little more surface-based risk was much more the conversation. But I think you're right, just the general principle of gradual scaffolding, kind of moving our way back into community and in comfortable ways, knowing like, all right, we made it this far. Now we can go a little further in the kiddie pool and then a little further, but we're going to wait a while till we get to the diving board and the 7-layer bars. But we'll get there. So how to move through that, and potlucks and that, I think, are in the deep end maybe a little bit, but also things we also know we can shift quickly. Had to last spring in unprecedented ways, and kind of on a dime, and maybe some of that will happen as things recede, and other things will need to take some time. So no specific guidance yet on coffee or passing the plate, but we will be creative to find ways to accept people's money.
Yeah, I have conflicting values, having been on the pledge committee as well as this committee, because we do want to encourage people to continue to contribute. But, with the phones, they can go on, donate that way.
We also have one congregant who very much would like to have a memorial service in our church and, a reception afterwards in the church in person. And I mean, he would love to have that as soon as possible, but no, no potential dates, huh?
And we were talking just about that specifically during our last meeting, and I'd say it would have to be some sort of hybrid. I don't know that we could accommodate the traditional service, including food and other things within our church in a safe manner right now. We'd have to work out some different sort of details, I'd say.
Well, that situation is very difficult with any kind of social distancing. You go to a memorial service and you go to reception and you shake hands and you hug people and you stand next to them visiting, and then you add food and not a good ventilation system. I think it's sad to say, but it's just red flag after red flag.
Would you like to be on our committee, Marge? We'd really.
No, thank you.
No, I mean that's.
You're doing a fine job.
But thank you for your support. I mean, that's our concern, right? It could be a real super spreader type event, right? That's a perfect storm kind of thing. And we've got to think, I think I have some compassion, and we want people to be able to do the things that are meaningful for them and try to do them in a compassionate way. But we've got to kind of be creative right now until we feel like it can be safely done.
Well, and the online memorial services that we have had have been very meaningful, I think. Very nice experience. I would hope for the family, for the people who attended, I think it was for them, but there is that personal touch that it's very difficult. You see a friend that you haven't seen for a long time and you start, and then you just, I'm not comfortable hugging you, and that's tough to say to 50 people, one after another, after another, after another. I think so I don't know, I guess I just think red flags flying all over. And it's very hard to say, because I know it's very meaningful to people who want to do that sort of thing, but.
Yeah, I would echo that it's one of the hardest things this year in ministry. No minister wants to say no to a family that wants to have a rite of passage or a memorial or a wedding or a child dedication, all those things I went to seminary for to do, and to be there for folks. Luckily, you're right, Marge, we've been able to do it in some ways, technologically, and that has had a different set of images in terms of people globally or across the country, or that otherwise couldn't be there, a different type of accessibility. And you're right, I think we'll be creative as we move into these coming months of maybe it's something a little more of a hybrid version. Maybe there's a small group of folks or close family that is smaller and not just a public service, but there's a group of folks that could be distanced in the sanctuary and masked, and and there for the service, as well as having it live streamed or at least recorded or something so that it's available for folks as well. And maybe there's maybe the bars are out in the courtyard or whatever. So it depends on the wishes of the family, if that's something they're wanting to do, and what we can do safely in our space. But yeah, it's always a balance, and finding the best way forward is, none of it's easy, and none of it's the most comfortable, or doesn't feel the best. Compassion, have to say no, or at least not this way. Yeah.
But kudos to you and the staff, Luke, because having participated in Diana Taylor's memorial, I think, A, that was amazingly well put together, and B, we were able to see people worldwide, really, as it aired or as we had a Zoom reception afterwards, who would not have been able to attend an in-person one. So it was an interesting way to do it. Certainly you weren't getting the hugs or the other, feeling of togetherness, but in a way it became more inclusive. And perhaps that can be something going forward we can hopefully work with.
This is Shelly. Sorry, my video isn't on. I had to get my feet up, and the computer I'm on, the camera doesn't work, so I can't turn it on. Yeah, I would echo what George just said. I think attention to the subject even is amazing. The circles that I'm in right now talk about this staying. It's so vital for people who can't travel or don't want to take the risk to be able to participate. So in a way, it's been great. I've been all over the world. It's kind of sad knowing everyone's rushing to get back when people have leaned in to hug me. I cringe. And I think that's going to be around for a while. I think everyone will have their own reaction. So I wish I had words of wisdom, but I don't. I just know that I too crave being in person. And I tell everyone I come across about our services. And I think so it's been great that people can zoom in and experience things they haven't or would not be able to or didn't before. But as Luke said, the AIM team had been doing Zoom meetings in the past regardless. So it's all possible. We just have to be creative. And I wanted to mention one of the best presents I've ever gotten were two little mittens that were drawn on paper, stapled to a piece of string that was told to me that it was the circumference of my niece, and she was mailing me a hug. So I was to put the mittens around myself and consider myself hugged.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley, for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. One of the interesting things that we'll talk about, I know we're at our time here, is there are a lot of creative ways that congregations across denominations are figuring out how to go back in person. And I will say a lot of that flexibility also relates to physical spaces and buildings and what's possible in larger spaces and differently ventilated or climate spaces with windows and stuff like that makes a difference for what folks can do. But just like, for example, they're talking about in the UUA, talking about how do we create cultures of consent even more intentionally as we come back together around who's comfortable with a hug or not. The church down in Lincoln said they were later this summer, we're moving towards limited in person, and they already had a plan for name tags. So they're going to have little colored stickers on them. Green meant comfortable with a hug. Yellow, I'll talk to you, but I kind of want to maintain distance. Red, I'm going to be masked. I'm going to walk past you. I'm just here to be in the space at the service, and then I'm leaving. That's it. Stay away. And so it's just a little simple thing, like, this is what I'm comfortable with. Those are things we can do, stuff like that, of how we're creating a culture where it's making sure folks are comfortable, and that will lead to other conversations more generally too, beyond just virus risk as well. So grateful for the creativity of our colleagues. Are there other comments or questions or hopes that folks wanted to share in our last couple minutes here?
I'm curious, are we going to have name tags on Sunday?
Sorry, Trish, my church internet just you
Okay.
paused completely. Can you say that once again?
Are we going to have name tags on Sunday, this Sunday? I'm just curious.
That was, I think, a 18 reply email thread a while back, where our hope was yes, and then we couldn't figure it out the best way to do it, either logistically, not creating bottlenecks, not having people all sharing the same pens or markers or that sort of stuff. We thought about like, well, I don't know. So no.
Okay. No, I forgot about the pen sharing programs. I'm just so afraid that after all this time, and I'm still fairly new, and everybody's going to have a mask on, I'm going to ignore somebody that I shouldn't ignore.
So. Yeah. I think we should have maybe write it on your mask before you come or something like that. But yes, we're going to think about that for our next services, about what we might be able to do with a little more lead time. Yeah.
I remember I asked Randy, as I had already retired or stopped working, but he was still here with the kids, and I just couldn't believe they were all wearing masks at work. And how are they doing that, the kids? And he showed me that, he had painted a little smile on his yellow mask. So he walked around with his painted smile on his face. So, but now I don't think about it, much, but it's funny how that was so present for me initially.
Any final things?
I'll try to bring my name tag from home.
There you go.
That's what I'm thinking, if I've got one.
Yes, we should have put that in the checklist. Bring your own name tag. Yeah, that's right. Well, I want to again express my gratitude for this wise circle of colleagues, friends, leaders here in the church, and for all of you who have found your way to stay connected and stay engaged, and as we move through this together. And the summer will feel and look a little different at church. It does feel like we're opening in some different ways and connecting in some different ways. And so you can feel a different energy, I think, here among the staff, and just preparing the building. I had one last story. I had Elizabeth McCulley, who's going to be our guest preacher. She was going to be for this week, but will have to be June 6th. She's the pastor at Christ United Methodist. She's leaving that and leaving Rochester for a new position up in the Twin Cities, but she'll preach. But right before she came in, I looked around the lobby and I'm like, I got to clean this place up. And I was like putting boxes off to the side. I'm like, no, we're a real church. Really, we are. Like, we got our stuff together. So there's a different energy of how we're preparing the space. Amy's got a spreadsheet of all the things that need to be cleaned before Chalice Camp and all that sort of stuff. So things are moving. We're on our way slowly. So I want to end with these words, which is one of my favorite and always applicable, from Wayne Arneson, UU minister. It says, "Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone."